The day after seeing the shadow, I couldn't focus. Every noise, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, made me jump. Thandi and I stuck close to Baba Dlamini, who spent most of his time meditating or performing small rituals around the village. "Why do you think it's still here?" Thandi asked as we sat outside Baba Dlamini's hut. "I don't know," I admitted. "Baba said the spirit was gone, but what if this is something new? Or worse, what if it's stronger now?" Thandi shook her head. "I can't go through that again. I thought we were free." Before I could respond, Baba Dlamini stepped out of his hut, his face serious. He held a bundle of herbs and a small wooden charm. "We need to return to the forest," he said. My stomach dropped. "Again? The shadow you both saw is not the spirit," he said. "But it is connected. The ancestors are warning me that the forest holds the answers we need." Thandi's face paled. "What if it's a trap? What if we go back and something worse happens?" Baba Dlamini placed a hand on her shoulder. "Fear is the spirit's weapon. It thrives on it. If we let fear control us, it will only grow stronger." I nodded, though my heart was pounding. "When do we leave?" "Tonight," he said. As the sun set, the three of us prepared to enter the forest again. This time, Baba Dlamini gave us stronger charms and instructed us to stay close to him at all times. "The forest will feel different," he warned. "It knows we are coming." Those words sent chills down my spine, but I tried not to let it show. The villagers gathered to see us off, their faces etched with worry. "Be careful," one woman whispered as she handed me a small candle for light. We stepped into the forest, and immediately, I could feel the difference. The air was colder, heavier. The trees seemed to lean closer together, their twisted branches blocking out the moonlight. Baba Dlamini led the way, his staff glowing faintly as he chanted under his breath. Thandi and I followed close behind, clutching our torches. "Do you hear that?" Thandi whispered. I strained my ears. At first, there was nothing but the sound of our footsteps. But then I heard it, a faint whispering, like voices carried on the wind. "It's the forest," Baba Dlamini said. "It's alive with the energy of the spirit." "Are we walking into a trap?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We are walking toward the truth," he replied. After what felt like hours, we reached the same clearing where we had destroyed the altar. The broken stones still lay scattered on the ground, but the area felt different. The air was thicker, and the whispering grew louder, almost like a chorus of voices. "This is where it began," Baba Dlamini said. "And this is where it must end." Thandi and I stood frozen as he stepped forward, sprinkling herbs around the clearing and chanting. As he worked, the shadows around us began to move. At first, it was subtle, a flicker here, a ripple there. But soon, they grew bolder, stretching and twisting toward us like long, black fingers. "Stay in the circle!" Baba Dlamini shouted. Thandi and I huddled together as he drew a circle of powder around us. The shadows recoiled when they touched the edge, hissing like snakes. "What is that?" Thandi cried. "It's the spirit's remnants," Baba Dlamini said. "The energy left behind after we destroyed its anchor. It's trying to reform." "How do we stop it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We weaken it," he said. "And then we send it back to where it came from." Baba Dlamini began a powerful chant, his voice echoing through the clearing. The shadows writhed and shrieked, their forms flickering like dying flames. But they didn't retreat. Instead, they grew more aggressive, slamming against the edges of the circle and sending waves of cold air toward us. "They're getting stronger!" Thandi shouted. "Hold your ground!" Baba Dlamini commanded. I gripped my torch tightly, my heart racing. One of the shadows lunged at me, and I swung the torch, the flames forcing it back. "Light is their weakness," Baba Dlamini said. "Keep them at bay while I finish the ritual." Thandi and I worked together, holding the shadows off with our torches. But for every shadow we pushed back, two more seemed to take its place. "Hurry!" I shouted. Baba Dlamini raised his staff, his chant reaching a crescendo. The ground beneath us began to shake, and a blinding light erupted from the circle, driving the shadows back. The whispering stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The clearing was still, the shadows gone. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive energy that had hung over the forest was gone. "It's done," Baba Dlamini said, his voice weary. Thandi collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Is it really over this time?" Baba Dlamini nodded. "The spirit's remnants have been banished. The forest will heal now." I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. As we made our way back to the village, the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, lighting our path. For the first time in a long time, the forest felt alive, not haunted. The walk back to the village felt lighter, almost surreal. The first morning light painted the world in soft colors, and the oppressive darkness that had loomed over us for so long seemed to have lifted. When we arrived, the villagers were already awake, waiting anxiously by the square. Their worried faces broke into smiles as they saw us approach. "Is it over?" someone asked. Baba Dlamini raised his staff, his voice calm but firm. "The remnants of the spirit have been banished. The forest will heal, and the village is safe again." Cheers erupted, and people hugged one another, their relief palpable. Some fell to their knees, whispering prayers of gratitude. Thandi and I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the celebration. She turned to me, her face still pale but with a small smile tugging at her lips. "We did it! For real this time." I nodded, though a part of me still felt uneasy. We had banished the spirit's energy, but the memory of the shadowy figures and their glowing red eyes lingered in my mind. The next few days were quiet. Baba Dlamini continued his rituals, walking the village's perimeter each morning with herbs and charms to ensure no lingering energy remained. Thandi and I helped where we could, but for the most part, we rested. The sleepless nights, the battles with shadows, and the constant fear had taken their toll. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks," Thandi said one afternoon as we sat by the river. "I haven't," I admitted with a small laugh. "But maybe tonight will be different." She smiled, skipping a stone across the water. "It's strange. I was so scared for so long, and now that it's over, I don't know what to do with myself." "Maybe we can just live," I said. "No spirits, no shadows. Just normal life." Thandi nodded, but there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. "Do you think it's really over?" I hesitated. "I want to believe it is. Baba Dlamini said the forest will heal, and he's never been wrong before." "But," she pressed. I sighed, looking out at the river. "I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching us." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to take a walk through the village. The streets were quiet, most people having gone to bed early, eager to reclaim some normalcy in their lives. As I passed the edge of the village, I saw someone standing near the old well. At first, I thought it was one of the villagers, but as I got closer, I realized it was someone I didn't recognize. The figure was cloaked in a dark robe, their face obscured by a hood. They stood perfectly still, their head tilted slightly as if listening to something only they could hear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Finally, the figure turned to face me. Though their face was hidden, I could feel their gaze, cold and piercing, like they were looking straight into my soul. "You've disturbed the balance," they said, their voice low and raspy. I froze, my blood running cold. "What do you mean?" "The forest remembers," they said. "It does not forgive so easily." Before I could respond, the figure stepped backward into the shadows and disappeared as if they had never been there. I ran straight to Baba Dlamini's hut, bursting through the door without knocking. "Baba!" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. He looked up from the fire, his eyes sharp with concern. "What is it?" I told him about the figure by the well, about their warning, and how they had vanished into the shadows. Baba Dlamini listened silently, his expression growing darker with each word. "This is troubling," he said when I finished. "Do you think they were a spirit?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Not a spirit," he said, "but someone, or something, connected to the forest. The balance we disturbed may have deeper consequences than I realized." "What should we do?" Baba Dlamini stood, grabbing his staff. "We must investigate. If this figure is a messenger of the forest, we need to understand their warning before it's too late." Thandi arrived moments later, having heard my frantic footsteps and shouting. When I explained what had happened, her face went pale. "Why can't it ever just be over?" she whispered. Baba Dlamini placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The journey to restore balance is never easy, but we must face it together." As we prepared to search the village for any signs of the mysterious figure, I couldn't shake their words from my mind. Asterisk, the forest remembers. It does not forgive so easily. Asterisk. We gathered near the well, where I had seen the mysterious figure. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the village. Baba Dlamini walked ahead of us, his staff glowing faintly, while Thandi and I followed close behind. "Are you sure you saw someone?" Thandi whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sure," I said, my eyes scanning the shadows. "They were standing right here." Baba Dlamini knelt near the well, sprinkling a handful of herbs around its edge. He closed his eyes and began to chant softly. The air grew still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Calling upon the ancestors," he said without opening his eyes. "If this figure was a messenger, they will leave traces in the energy of this place." Thandi and I stood silently, watching as the faint glow around his staff grew brighter. A soft wind picked up, rustling the leaves around us. "There," Baba Dlamini said suddenly, pointing to the ground. We looked where he was pointing and saw faint footprints leading away from the well, toward the forest. "Those weren't there before," Thandi said, her voice shaking. "They weren't meant to be seen until now," Baba Dlamini said. "The ancestors are guiding us." Once again, we found ourselves stepping into the forest. But this time, it felt different. The air was heavier, the darkness thicker. The trees seemed to watch us, their twisted branches reaching out like arms. The footprints glowed faintly, leading us deeper and deeper into the woods. "Do you think the figure will come back?" Thandi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said. "But whatever they are, they're trying to tell us something." Baba Dlamini didn't say anything, but I could see the tension in his posture. He clutched his staff tightly, his eyes scanning the forest ahead. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the center was a large tree, its trunk gnarled and blackened as if it had been struck by lightning. "This tree," Baba Dlamini murmured. "It holds great power." "What kind of power?" I asked. "The kind that connects the living to the spirit world," he said. "This must be where the figure came from." Baba Dlamini approached the tree cautiously, his staff glowing brighter with each step. The air around it felt cold, even though the night was warm. He placed a hand on the tree's trunk and closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground beneath us began to tremble. "What's happening?" Thandi cried, grabbing my arm. "The tree is responding," Baba Dlamini said, his voice calm despite the shaking. The bark of the tree began to shift, forming symbols and patterns that glowed faintly in the darkness. "What does it mean?" I asked. "It's a warning," Baba Dlamini said, his voice grave. "The forest is not angry at us for banishing the spirit, it is angry because we disturbed something ancient, something that should have been left alone." "Like what?" Thandi asked, her eyes wide with fear. Before Baba Dlamini could answer, a voice echoed through the clearing. It was low and raspy, the same voice I had heard by the well. "You have opened a door," it said. "And now, something has come through." The figure from the well appeared at the edge of the clearing, their dark robe blending into the shadows. "You," Baba Dlamini said, turning to face them. "Who are you?" "I am a servant of the forest," the figure said, their voice calm but cold. "I come to warn you, your actions have awakened an ancient force. It does not forgive. It does not forget. What force? I asked, stepping forward despite my fear. The figure turned to me, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. The spirit you banished was only the beginning. The forest's balance has been broken, and now the one who sleeps beneath it has stirred. Who is beneath the forest? Thandi asked, her voice trembling. The figure tilted their head, as if listening to a distant sound. You will see soon enough, they said. With that, they stepped back into the shadows and disappeared, leaving us alone in the clearing. We stood in silence, the weight of the figure's words sinking in. What did they mean? Thandi asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. They meant that our battle is far from over, Baba Dlamini said. Whatever lies beneath this forest is older and more powerful than the spirit we faced. And now, it is waking up. A chill ran down my spine as I looked at the tree, its glowing symbols slowly fading back into the bark. What do we do? I asked. We prepare, Baba Dlamini said, his voice firm. The forest has given us a warning, and we must heed it. If we don't, the consequences could be far worse than anything we've faced before. As we made our way back to the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest, once a place of life and beauty, now felt like a living thing, a thing with eyes, ears, and a heart that beat deep beneath the earth. Whatever was coming, I knew it would test us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. The village was quiet when we returned, but it no longer felt peaceful. The warning from the forest hung over us like a storm cloud. Thandi and I couldn't stop replaying the figure's words in our minds. The one who sleeps beneath has stirred. We sat outside Baba Dlamini's hut, watching as he prepared for what lay ahead. He worked tirelessly, mixing herbs, drawing protective symbols, and crafting charms. His movements were quick and deliberate, as though time itself was running out. What do you think they meant? Thandi asked me quietly. I don't know, I admitted. But if it's worse than the spirit we dealt with before, we need to be ready. Thandi hugged her knees to her chest. What if we're not ready? What if it's too strong for us? I didn't have an answer for her. That evening, Baba Dlamini called a meeting with the entire village. Everyone gathered around the central fire, their faces tense with worry. I must speak plainly, Baba Dlamini began, his voice calm but grave. The spirit we banished was only a piece of something much larger. When we disturbed the altar, we woke a force that has been sleeping for centuries. This force is ancient, powerful, and dangerous. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What kind of force? An elder asked. Baba Dlamini hesitated, choosing his words carefully. It is not a spirit, but something older. It is tied to the very roots of this forest. Long ago, our ancestors sealed it away, ensuring it could never rise again. But now it stirs, and it will not stop until it has broken free. Why is this happening now? Someone else asked. Because the balance has been broken, Baba Dlamini said. The forest is alive, and it remembers what was done to it. We must restore the balance before this force can awaken fully. The villagers looked at one another, fear etched on their faces. What can we do? Thandi asked, her voice trembling. We prepare, Baba Dlamini said firmly. We strengthen our defenses, protect the village, and call upon the ancestors for guidance. But above all, we must not let fear consume us. Fear is what gives this force its power. The next day, everyone worked together to fortify the village. Baba Dlamini led the effort, instructing us to hang charms on every door and sprinkle protective herbs along the boundaries. Thandi and I worked side by side, tying charms to trees and fences. The villagers moved quickly, their fear driving them to action. Do you think this will be enough? Thandi asked as we hung the last charm on a fence post. I hope so, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. But if it's not, at least we'll be ready to fight. Baba Dlamini joined us, his staff glowing faintly as he inspected our work. You've done well, he said. But this is only the beginning. We must stay vigilant. That night, the village was eerily quiet. No one spoke, and even the animals seemed to sense the tension in the air. I couldn't sleep, so I sat by the window, staring out at the forest. The trees swayed gently in the wind, but their movements felt unnatural, like they were alive and watching us. Thandi knocked softly on my door and slipped inside. "I couldn't sleep," she said, sitting next to me. "Me neither," I admitted. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the forest. "What was that?" Thandi whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," I said, my heart pounding. The sound grew louder, like the groaning of something massive shifting beneath the earth. It was followed by a sharp crack, like a tree snapping in half. We ran outside, where several villagers had already gathered. Baba Dlamini stood in the center of the square, his face illuminated by the light of his staff. "It has begun," he said, his voice heavy with dread. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath us began to shake. It wasn't a violent earthquake, but a steady, rhythmic tremor, as if something deep below was trying to push its way to the surface. "Stay calm!" Baba Dlamini shouted. "Hold your ground!" But it was hard to stay calm when the earth itself felt alive. The trees at the edge of the village swayed wildly, their branches snapping and crashing to the ground. "What do we do?" I shouted over the noise. Baba Dlamini raised his staff high, its light cutting through the darkness. "We hold the line. Protect the village at all costs." The villagers scrambled to action, reinforcing the barriers and lighting torches to ward off whatever was coming. Thandi and I stood side by side, clutching our charms tightly. The rumbling grew louder, and the air grew colder. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the trembling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the night, shaking us to our cores. "It's here," Baba Dlamini said, his voice barely above a whisper. The roar echoed through the village, shaking the walls of our huts and sending chills down my spine. It wasn't like any animal I had ever heard before. It was deep and guttural, like the sound of the earth itself crying out. "What was that?" Thandi whispered, clutching my arm tightly. Baba Dlamini stood in the center of the square, his staff glowing brighter than I had ever seen it. "The force beneath the forest is stirring," he said. "It is testing the boundaries, searching for a way to break free." The villagers looked to Baba Dlamini, fear etched into their faces. "What do we do?" someone asked. "We hold our ground," Baba Dlamini said firmly. "Do not give in to fear. It feeds on your weakness. Stay strong, and the balance can still be restored." The night felt endless. The villagers gathered around the central fire, their eyes fixed on the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches, made us jump. Thandi and I sat near the edge of the square, keeping watch. The charms we had hung on the fences swayed gently in the wind, their faint glow reassuring but not enough to calm my nerves. "What if it breaks through?" Thandi asked softly. "Then we fight," I said, though my voice wavered. Thandi didn't respond, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We both knew that if this force was as ancient and powerful as Baba Dlamini said, fighting might not be enough. Just before dawn, something moved at the edge of the forest. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I saw it, a shadow, tall and thin, stepping out from between the trees. "Look!" I whispered, grabbing Thandi's arm. She turned and gasped. The shadow moved slowly, its shape shifting as it came closer. It wasn't solid, but more like smoke, swirling and twisting in the air. "Baba Dlamini!" I called out, my voice trembling. He turned, his staff glowing brighter as he walked toward us. When he saw the shadow, his expression hardened. "Do not let it cross the barrier," he said. The villagers gathered behind him, holding their torches and charms. The shadow stopped at the edge of the village, just beyond the line of herbs and charms we had placed earlier. It seemed to hesitate, as if testing the barrier. Then it spoke. "You cannot stop what is coming," it said, its voice a deep, hollow whisper that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. The one who sleeps beneath will rise, and your village will fall. We will not let that happen, Baba Dlamini said, his voice steady. The shadow laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. You are but children playing with fire. The forest remembers, and it will take what is owed. With that, the shadow dissolved into the air, leaving us standing in silence. The villagers erupted into fearful whispers, but Baba Dlamini raised his staff, silencing them. Do not let its words frighten you, he said. Fear is its weapon. We must stay strong. What does it mean by the forest will take what is owed? I asked. Baba Dlamini sighed. Long ago, our ancestors made a pact with the forest to seal the ancient force away. But such pacts come at a price. Over the years, the balance has been disrupted. Now, the forest seeks to reclaim what it has lost. Is there a way to fix it? Thandi asked. There is always a way, Baba Dlamini said. But it will not be easy. We must face the force directly and restore the balance ourselves. Baba Dlamini spent the rest of the day preparing us for what was to come. He divided the villagers into groups, assigning each one a role. Some were tasked with reinforcing the barriers, others with gathering supplies. Thandi and I stayed by Baba Dlamini's side, helping him prepare the charms and potions we would need for the battle ahead. This will protect you, he said, handing each of us a small vial filled with a glowing green liquid. Drink it only when you are in grave danger. It will give you strength and clarity, but only for a short time. What about you? I asked. Baba Dlamini smiled faintly. I will be fine. My strength comes from the ancestors. As the sun set, the village was quiet once again. The barriers were stronger, the charms glowing brightly in the fading light. But even with all our preparations, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were facing something far beyond our understanding. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the shadow's words, the one who sleeps beneath will rise. Whatever was coming, I knew we were running out of time. The next morning, the village woke to an eerie stillness. The birds that usually chirped in the early hours were silent, and the air felt thick and heavy, like it was harder to breathe. Baba Dlamini stood at the center of the village, holding his glowing staff. His face was calm, but I could see the tension in his eyes. It is time, he said, his voice steady. The forest is gathering its strength. We must be ready. The villagers moved quickly, checking the barriers and gathering their weapons. Most of them carried spears or torches, while others held charms and herbs. Thandi and I stuck close to Baba Dlamini, unsure of what to expect. Stay close to me, he said. Whatever happens, do not leave my side. It started just after midday. The sky, which had been clear all morning, suddenly darkened. Thick black clouds rolled in from the direction of the forest, blocking out the sun. The villagers looked up, fear etched on their faces. What's happening? Thandi whispered. The forest is waking, Baba Dlamini said. This is its warning. The wind picked up, howling through the village and shaking the trees. The barriers we had built trembled but held firm. Then, from the edge of the forest, a sound echoed, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. It's here, Baba Dlamini said, gripping his staff tightly. The force has begun its attack. Out of the darkness, shadows began to emerge. They were like the one we had seen the night before, tall and shifting, their forms twisting and writhing as they moved. They're testing the barriers, Baba Dlamini said. Hold your ground. The villagers formed a line, their torches held high. The shadows stopped at the edge of the barriers, their glowing eyes fixed on us. You cannot stop us, one of them said, its voice a low, menacing whisper. The one who sleeps beneath is awakening. This village will fall. We will not fall, Baba Dlamini said, stepping forward. This land belongs to us, and we will defend it. The shadows laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. Then, as if on cue, they lunged forward, slamming into the barriers. The charms and herbs glowed brightly, pushing the shadows back. But they didn't stop. They kept coming, testing the barriers over and over again. "Hold the line!" Baba Dlamini shouted. For hours, the villagers fought to keep the shadows at bay. Baba Dlamini's staff glowed brighter than ever, sending bursts of light into the darkness and driving the shadows back. Thandi and I worked together, throwing herbs onto the ground and holding our charms tightly. The shadows hissed whenever they touched the barriers, but they didn't stop. "They're getting stronger," Thandi said, her voice trembling. "I know," I said, my heart pounding. Just when it seemed like we were holding our ground, a loud crack echoed through the village. We turned to see one of the barriers shatter, the glowing charms falling to the ground. "They've broken through!" someone shouted. The shadows surged forward, pouring into the village like a flood. The villagers screamed, scrambling to defend themselves. Baba Dlamini raised his staff, sending a wave of light across the square. The shadows recoiled, but they didn't retreat. "They're too many," Thandi said, clutching my arm. "Stay close to me," Baba Dlamini said, his voice firm. "We can still stop this." Baba Dlamini closed his eyes and began to chant, his voice low and steady. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and the light from his staff grew brighter. "What's he doing?" Thandi asked. "He's calling the ancestors," I said, watching in awe. The shadows hesitated, as if sensing the power gathering around Baba Dlamini. Then, one by one, glowing figures began to appear. They were faint and transparent, but their presence was undeniable. "The ancestors," Thandi whispered, her eyes wide. The glowing figures moved forward, forming a line between us and the shadows. Their presence seemed to weaken the dark forces, pushing them back toward the edge of the village. "You will not take this land," one of the ancestors said, their voice strong and commanding. "Leave now, or face the consequences." The shadows hissed, retreating slightly but not disappearing. "This is not over," one of them said. "The one who sleeps beneath will rise, and you cannot stop it." With that, the shadows melted back into the forest, leaving the village in silence. The villagers stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened. Baba Dlamini lowered his staff, the light dimming but not disappearing. "We have won this battle," he said, his voice tired but resolute. "But the war is far from over." "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaky. "We prepare," he said. "The shadows will return, and next time, they will be stronger. We must find a way to stop the one who sleeps beneath before it's too late." As the villagers began to repair the broken barriers, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The shadows were gone for now, but their warning still echoed in my mind: the one who sleeps beneath will rise, and I knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. The village was quiet the next morning, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Baba Dlamini gathered the villagers in the square again. His staff still glowed faintly, but his face looked tired, like the battle had drained him. "The shadows will return," he said. "And when they do, they will be stronger. We must find the source of their power and stop it before it's too late." "What do we do?" Thandi asked. "We go to the heart of the forest," Baba Dlamini said. "That is where the force lies. If we can reach it, we might be able to stop the one who sleeps beneath from fully awakening." The villagers looked at one another, fear written all over their faces. "Who will go with you?" someone asked. "I will need a small group," Baba Dlamini said. "Only those who are brave and willing to face the unknown." Thandi and I stepped forward immediately. "We'll go," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. Baba Dlamini nodded. "Very well. We leave at dawn." That day, we prepared for the journey into the forest. Baba Dlamini gave each of us a charm for protection and a pouch of herbs to ward off the shadows. "This will keep you safe," he said, handing me a small charm carved from bone. "But remember, your strength comes from within. Trust your instincts and stay close to me." Thandi packed a small bag with food and water, her hands trembling as she worked. "Do you think we'll make it back?" she asked quietly. "We have to," I said. "The village is counting on us." The next morning, We set out just as the sun began to rise. The villagers gathered to see us off, their faces a mix of fear and hope. "Be careful," one of the elders said, "and may the ancestors guide you." The forest was darker than I remembered, even in the early morning light. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches blocking out the sun. Baba Dlamini led the way, his staff glowing softly to light our path. Thandi and I walked close behind him, our charms clutched tightly in our hands. "Stay close," Baba Dlamini said. "The forest is alive, and it does not welcome visitors." As we ventured deeper into the forest, strange things began to happen. The air grew colder, and the ground felt soft and spongy under our feet, like it was breathing. Every so often, we heard whispers, faint and distant, like voices carried on the wind. "Do you hear that?" Thandi asked, her eyes wide with fear. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But don't let it distract you. It's just the forest trying to scare us." Baba Dlamini stopped suddenly, holding up his staff. "Be silent," he said. We froze, listening. At first, I didn't hear anything, but then I caught it, a faint rustling sound, like something moving through the trees. "What is it?" Thandi whispered. "Something is watching us," Baba Dlamini said, his voice low. "Stay close and keep moving." After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient tree with roots that stretched out in every direction. "This is it," Baba Dlamini said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of the forest." The tree pulsed faintly, like it was alive. Its bark was covered in strange symbols, and its roots glowed with a soft, green light. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We must find the altar," Baba Dlamini said. "It is the key to stopping the force. But be careful. This place is sacred, and it will not let us pass easily." As we stepped into the clearing, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The whispers grew louder, turning into angry voices that seemed to come from all around us. "Stay close!" Baba Dlamini shouted. The shadows appeared out of nowhere, pouring into the clearing like a dark wave. They moved faster this time, their forms more solid and menacing. "They're stronger here," Thandi said, her voice trembling. "Because we're closer to the source," Baba Dlamini said. "Hold your charms and stand your ground." We formed a circle, our charms glowing brightly as the shadows closed in. Baba Dlamini raised his staff, sending out bursts of light that pushed them back, but they kept coming. "This is only the beginning," he said. "We must find the altar before it's too late." As the shadows surrounded us, something strange happened. The glowing roots of the tree began to pulse faster, and the air shimmered like heat rising from the ground. Suddenly, I saw flashes of something, images that felt like memories, but they weren't mine. I saw villagers from long ago, standing around the tree, chanting in a language I didn't understand. I saw the forest alive with light and energy, and then I saw it, the force, a massive, shadowy figure bound beneath the earth. "Do you see it?" Thandi asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," I said, my heart pounding. "It's showing us the past," Baba Dlamini said. "The forest is trying to tell us something." The visions faded as quickly as they had appeared, leaving us standing in the clearing, the shadows still circling us. "We must hurry," Baba Dlamini said. "The altar is near, but the forest will not let us reach it without a fight." The shadows circled us like wolves closing in on prey. Baba Dlamini's staff flickered, the light dimming as his strength waned. "The altar is close," he said, his voice strained. "We just need to find it. Do not lose hope." The ancient tree pulsed again, its roots glowing brighter. I noticed one of the roots stretched farther than the others, leading away from the clearing into the deeper darkness of the forest. "Look," I said, pointing. "That root, it's glowing more than the rest." Baba Dlamini followed my gaze and nodded. "It's guiding us. Quickly follow it." We moved fast, staying close to the glowing root as it weaved through the forest. The ground beneath our feet was soft and damp, and the air smelled of earth and decay. The whispers followed us, growing louder with each step. It felt like the forest was alive, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Thandi clung to my arm, her grip tight. "What if we're walking into a trap?" she whispered. "We don't have a choice," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The route led us to a small hill covered in thick vines and moss. At the top of the hill stood a stone altar, cracked and weathered with age. Symbols like the ones on the ancient tree were carved into its surface, glowing faintly. "This is it," Baba Dlamini said, his voice filled with awe. "The altar of the forest." Baba Dlamini knelt before the altar, placing his staff on the ground. He pulled out a pouch of herbs and scattered them over the altar, chanting in the ancient language of our ancestors. The air grew heavier, and the ground beneath us began to tremble. The glowing symbols on the altar brightened, casting an eerie light across the hill. "What's happening?" Thandi asked, her voice shaking. "The altar is responding," Baba Dlamini said. "It knows we are here to restore the balance." But as the light grew stronger, so did the shadows. They surged toward us, their forms more solid and terrifying than ever. "They're trying to stop us!" I shouted. "Keep them back!" Baba Dlamini said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I need more time!" Thandi and I stood side by side, holding our charms tightly. The shadows hissed as they approached, recoiling when the light from our charms touched them. "Stay together!" I shouted. "Don't let them separate us!" The shadows grew bolder, lunging at us with sharp, claw-like hands. I swung my charm in wide arcs, the glowing light keeping them at bay. Thandi threw herbs into the air, creating a barrier that slowed them down. But there were too many of them. For every shadow we pushed back, two more took its place. "We can't hold them off much longer," Thandi cried. "You don't have to," Baba Dlamini said. "The ancestors will guide us now." Baba Dlamini's chant reached a crescendo, his voice rising above the noise of the shadows. The air shimmered again, and one by one, glowing figures began to appear around the altar. The ancestors had returned. They formed a circle around us, their presence pushing the shadows back. The light from their forms was blinding, forcing the shadows to retreat into the darkness. "You have come far," one of the ancestors said, their voice deep and commanding. "But the balance is not yet restored. The force beneath the forest stirs, and it will not rest until it is free." "What do we do?" Baba Dlamini asked, his voice filled with reverence. "You must make a choice," the ancestor said. "The altar holds the key to binding the force forever, but the cost will be great." "What cost?" I asked, stepping forward. The ancestor turned to me, their glowing eyes filled with sorrow. "The altar requires a sacrifice," they said. "A life must be given to restore the balance and keep the force bound." Thandi gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A life? But whose?" "The choice is yours," the ancestor said. "But choose wisely. The fate of the village, and the forest, depends on it." Baba Dlamini bowed his head, his shoulders slumping. "I feared it would come to this," he said. "The forest always demands a price." The shadows lingered at the edge of the light, waiting. The whispers grew louder, almost like they were mocking us. "We don't have much time," I said, my heart pounding. Baba Dlamini looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness I had never seen before. "The choice must be made," he said. "And it must be made now."